Thank you for joining today on this important topic of connecting wildfires data and health impacts. My name is Hailong Wang from the Pacific Northwest National Lab. I co-lead the IARPIC, Arctic Systems Interactions Priority Area 2, also known as the Systems Team or PA2, currently with Rainier Joseph from DOE, Caitlin Herbeck and Sean Serban from NASA, Emma Manuel from NSF, and Zoe Corfield from Code Regions and Research and Engineering Lab. Some of our colleagues are unable to join today. So on behalf of the PA2 team, I'm very glad to co-organize today's webinar on wildfires with the health team. So this topic is highly relevant to the PA2 objectives on the transport of smoke aerosol particles to the Arctic, their impact on snow and sea ice, and the fire disturbance effect on humans. So you may find more detailed information about the PA2 objectives on this meeting webpage. So, maybe I would let the other colleagues introduce the team first.
Yep. Emily or Sarah, do you like to introduce the health team?
Sure, I can start off. Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Trinacosta. I am with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Research and Development. I am one of the co-leads for the Community Resilience and Health Collaboration Team in IARPIC, which is Priority Area 1 in the current implementation plan. And I'll turn it to, let's see, Suzanne. I'll turn it to my colleague at EPA, Suzanne, next, and then we can pass it around the rest of the co-leads.
Thanks, Emily. I'm Suzanne Van Drunick. I work with Emily in EPA headquarters in DC, and we're really excited to have this webinar today and appreciate everyone's interest tuning in.
Sarah, you want to introduce yourself next?
Yep, I'll go really quick. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Yoder. I'm one of the co-leads as well. I work with the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium. And I just want to thank everyone for coming today. We're really excited to talk from, bigger scale modeling conversations all the way down to how this applies to human health considerations. So I think it'll be a really fun journey. This supports our objectives and the Community Resilience and Health team. We have one specifically about continuing research on air quality and human health. So I'm excited to be able to advance that a little bit with this meeting. Thanks.
And let's see, I think Heather's on as well.
Hi, this is Heather Scobie. I'm a member of or lead for the epidemiology team at CDC's Arctic Investigations Program in Alaska. I'm part of the health team with IARPIC. We don't work much in this area, but we do have an interest in respiratory diseases as they relate to infectious diseases. So happy to be here and follow the discussion.
Did I miss any of our other co-leads from Community Resilience and Health?
I see Brenna on the line.
Oh, there we go. Thanks. I couldn't see with all the different boxes.
No worries. Hey, everybody. This is Brenna Simons. I work with Heather at the CDC Arctic Investigations Program, and I'm now currently in a deputy director role here. And just echo what Heather said in terms of what AIP's focus is, and looking forward to the presentation. Thanks.
Yeah. Emma, do you want to introduce yourself? Thank you.
Emma, I know she might be in a place she can't come off mute. So Emma's a co-lead of the systems team, formerly known as PA2. We're trying to move away from the acronym, but yeah, Emma is a new co-lead for that team from the NSF Office of Polar Programs.
Yeah, thank you. So we're honored to have Professor James Randerson from the University of California, Irvine, joining us today in the panel discussion and also presenting their exciting work on the Arctic-boreal wildfire characteristics and drivers. So without further ado, Jim, please take it away and share your screen.
Is that, can people see the screen?
Yes. Okay.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Hailong, for the introduction and also for inviting me and Meredith to the present today. I'm in the Department of Earth System Science at UC Irvine. And this work was led by Rebecca Scholten, who is a postdoctoral scholar at UC Irvine. She's actually out this week off the grid in Canyonland, so that's why she's not presenting to you today. Rebecca is somewhat famous for, during her PhD at the Vrije University in the Netherlands, quantifying zombie fires across Arctic and boreal ecosystems in which fires overwinter and then start reburning the following spring. And this is actually a pretty important phenomena after large fire years in both Siberia and in North America. So continue here. Let's see if I can get this to go. Just a second. I'm not sure. Let me see. I can get this.
Does the arrows on your keyboard work?
Yeah, they're not working. Let me see. So let me just. Okay. Does that work? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So this is just a reminder overview of we've had a number of really strong, severe megafire complexes across the Arctic boreal domain within the last decade, including Alaska in 2015. Siberia in 2019, 2021, of course, Canada last year, and also British Columbia in 2021. And so this work of characterizing fire regimes across the Arctic boreal zone was led by Rebecca, and it was published in Nature Geoscience about last month. So just a little bit of background from my lab. Been working at trying to understand Arctic and boreal fires, their influence on the carbon cycle for over 20 years. And one of the drivers I think that's been really exciting to try to understand is that potentially lightning patterns are changing across the Arctic. And this is from a paper led by Yang Chen in my lab in 2021, Nature Climate Change, that shows that with climate warming, we expect increases in convective available potential energy across Arctic and boreal ecosystems. And this is kind of the energy in the lower atmosphere to drive thunderstorms and convection. And so this is expected to increase with climate warming substantially. And a number of scientists, including David Romps at UC Berkeley and at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, have developed lightning parameterizations that use CAPE as kind of the force that's like pulling air up, and then rainfall as an indicator of the amount of moisture for falling particles that would turn into ice in the upper atmosphere. And so this vertical movement of kind of uplift coupled with the mass of water sinking can create a charge separation and can drive lightning. And so lightning lightning ignitions have increased in parts of Alaska and Canada. And this is work led by Sander Vera-Verveek. And then this work showed that we have a potential for large increases moving into the future. And just to highlight this link between fires and permafrost, that there are a couple, I think, positive feedbacks where as fires kind of remove soil organic matter layers, they potentially can feedback positively on the permafrost carbon climate feedback. So yeah, removing the soil organic matter, like can potentially, and changing the surface albedo can accelerate permafrost thaw, releasing CO2. There's another, I think, really important role for increasing lightning and fire that's maybe a little bit counterintuitive, which is that with increases in fire at tree line and in Arctic tundra ecosystems, we actually expect an acceleration of biome shifts from kind of tussocky tundra into shrubs and into forests. And so, yeah, the fires are actually triggering a northward expansion of forest by basically preparing the soil and allowing for seeds to more easily grow and not desiccate, which they would normally desiccate in kind of the organic environment of a tussock tundra. So what the set of questions that Rebecca was really interested in her analysis was, how frequently does an area burn across the Arctic? How many ignitions are there per fire, which I'll talk about a little bit later? How large are fires? How long do fires burn? How intensely do they burn, and where do they burn? And a lot of work into Arctic and boreal fires is relied on satellite remote sensing observations, and they're mostly pixel based. And what Rebecca has really tried to pioneer is combining the pixel information into fire objects so that you can track the spread of fires across the landscape. So this is just to illustrate that. So this is kind of your typical way that fire information comes back. This is data from NOAA satellite, Suomi, NPP, and these show the active fire thermal anomalies for a large fire in the Northwest Territories. And you can see, like on the right, there's these, you can almost see some of the swath information from the satellite. And so this is generally, like, over the last couple of decades, this is the way many fire scientists have analyzed the data. And there's really a movement underway now to combine this information systematically to explore how fires are growing from day to day, what controls their extinction, what controls their ignition. And so this is just to illustrate that. This is now applying what's known as a convex hull algorithm to the outside of where those fire perimeter, where those active fires are burning on every day. And then you can actually track the growth of the fire around lakes and through periods of inclement weather or through periods of high pressure, higher vapor pressure deficit periods where the fires grow faster. And you can also see here, this is an example where several fires are growing together. So this was actually one of the largest fires from Yakutia. And it was really striking because there were many different lightning ignitions that were ignited on a similar day. And then from a series of kind of a cluster of thunderstorms. And then these different individual fires burned together. And so the color here is the day that an area burned. And you can see that there are a number of places that burned early in the record, and then they merged together later in the fire season. And so what Rebecca's done is to create this atlas that's freely available for others to use, that really characterize these day-by-day rates of spread for fires across different ecoregions in the Arctic-boreal domain. And so she then used this information and tried to characterize different fire properties and used that in a K-means classifier to try to quantify different fire regimes or pyroregions across the Arctic. And so inside this clustering algorithm, she fed it information about burned area, about the density of fires. So they're like fire occurrence density, how many fires occur within within 100 square kilometers, fire sizes, the start day of the fires, fire duration, and also fire intensity, which is complementary information on the radiative power, or how hot the fires are burning and how much radiation they're releasing. And so all of these properties she was able to extract out of this fire tracking algorithm that's tracking how the fires are moving across the landscape. So she puts all this together into a classifier. And this is kind of an example of the types of information that you can extract from this approach. So normally, like, this is kind of your traditional understanding of this is burned area on the left of areas that are vulnerable to fire, but you can break that up now into the number of fires that are occurring each year times fire size. And so you can see actually that, like, for example, in Eurasia, you tend to have like more fires towards the south, and fires tend to be larger as you move to the north, but then they drop off again as you move into more tussocky tundra regions on the very northern edge of the continent. And then for North America, you can see that in general, fires are larger often than they are in Eurasia. So similarly, you can look at things like fire seasonality and intensity. So this is now the time that fires start, the first ignition point that you see from the satellites. And so you can see in the Eurasia, like there's a band across the south. These are often areas that have a strong human influence, and the fires start often in early spring. And that's important. Sometimes the black carbon emitted by those fires will, there'll still be a lot of snow in other parts of the Arctic. So that can actually lead to a positive like feedback from the deposition of that black carbon further north. But then you have these cluster of areas where some of the fires actually start as late as like late July and August. And in many places in North America, you can see that the start dates are, early to mid-June. And then one really striking difference between fires in Eurasia and North America is how hot they burn. In North America, there's a one tree species that's absent from Eurasia, black spruce. And black spruce are like miniature, like Roman candles that love to burn. They have a very high, they have a very high rate of burning, and and they carry crown fires, and their reproductive system depends on a complete mortality. So they have serotinous cones. And so you can see that not everywhere here are black spruce dominant, but over the continent as a whole, the presence of black spruce in those ladder fuels tends to activate and carry larger crown fires. And in Eurasia, you have a distribution of species like pines and larch that tend to not have as strong ladder fuels. And so often the fires, on average, more of them will stay on the ground, and there'll be ground fires where they can smolder, but they don't release the same amount of heat, are less likely to generate something like a pyro-CB event in general. Okay, so combining this information together, so on the right are some of the different ways of thinking about fire regimes across the Arctic and boreal zone. On the left is the classification system that Rebecca derived. And so she broke it up into about 6 different areas. And then in North America, you have this common, large, intense. And then in Eurasia, you have places where it's like common, small, early, common, large, early. And then once you have these clustered areas, then you can explore the impact of human activity and their sensitivity to variability in climate. So here's on the right is now a measure of the wilderness fraction. And so in areas that have a low wilderness fraction, you tend to have a larger human impact. So you have more agricultural and prescribed burning, you have more unintentional ignitions, fire suppression goes up, and you have more fragmentation of fuels. And what Rebecca was able to show is that actually on areas with a higher wilderness fraction, there's a reduced, possibly from this fragmentation, and more frequent burning, there's actually a lower sensitivity of fires in more human-dominant areas to vapor pressure deficit. So vapor pressure deficit is this really important indicator of the drying potential of the atmosphere, and it's stronger in remote areas with little human influence. So this record in trying to extract all this information is relatively short, where we have this high quality set of satellite observations from Suomi NPP and from a spectral radiometer on Suomi NPP called VIIRS. And of course, there are longer records that go back for much of the Arctic, but I would like to just highlight some information that seems important for understanding fire trends. One is that the increases that we've seen recently, like in Canada and Siberia, in fire emissions and aerosol impacts, seems to be more closely associated with fires growing larger, not necessarily a larger number of fires on the landscape. And then what's interesting is that her classification system didn't use any information, for example, on vapor pressure deficit or climate, but you can ask the question, how sensitive are these different pyro regions to interannual variation in climate? And so here she finds that there's actually a very strong control and strong relationship with vapor pressure deficit for kind of moderate regions where like the common large intense, common large early, and common large cool pyro regions. But then you have like these other areas like rare small early pyro regions where there's a much lower sensitivity of that region to variation in climate. And so this work suggests that there's a potentially like a different climate sensitivity of different parts of the boreal forest to burning. And it can help us understand why really extreme fires are emerging in certain parts of Siberia and North America and not in other places, for example, like Eastern Eurasia, Northern Europe. Okay, so these are the punchline summary. Fire tracking provides valuable data for understanding fire regimes. Humans are playing an important role in shaping variability in Arctic-boreal pyro regions. Fire number and fire size show counteracting trends for this relatively short record. And pyro regions with large fires and recent extremes are the most sensitive to climate. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jim. We have time for questions. Please feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself or type in the chat. Maybe I'll get started. Yeah, very exciting work. Thank you. I know that your group also do modeling, fire modeling. I wonder how challenging it is for climate models to capture those fires.
I think, it's really challenging. I think that there's a potential that some of the land surface models now overestimate the carbon storage potential of Arctic and boreal ecosystems because they have a difficulty in representing fire processes, and especially the trends. About half now of the IPCC class models have a representation of fire, but it doesn't mean that they're capturing these larger extremes that we've seen in Canada and in in Siberia. And there's some preliminary work I'm aware of from Werner Kurtz and some of the Canadians where the 2023 Canadian wildfire season really disrupted their global carbon storage for the country compared to kind of the balance that had been accumulating over time. And so that's something that I'm working on as a part of an Above project, with the Above team and Elizabeth Hoy and others on trying to understand how the carbon stocks are changing in response to these fire regimes.
There's a question in the chat from Lisa. Are there many boreal tree or shrub species that require fire for germination as they're further south?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are probably folks on the call who can are more of an expert than I am. Yeah, black spruce, yes, with the serotinous cone, super dependent on fire for reproduction. As you move north, I will say we're working right now on the Anatuvik River fire on the North Slope in a collaboration with Adrian Roca and colleagues at Notre Dame. And what is really striking is that after that fire, there was, I don't necessarily think it was the germination. But Betulinana, the dwarf shrub, really takes off, potentially as a set of feedbacks between a length, kind of an extension of the active layer, more nutrient availability, and like greater, well, yeah, this just a greater, potentially a warmer soil, a more nutrient-rich soil, triggered by the fire, and it looks like it persists for decades. And I think a really important, like, long-term question is whether that will be kind of a permanent shift that's accelerated by the fire, or whether it's more of a natural successional process, and we'll see a recovery back to more of a tussock tundra, mature, steady state.
Any other questions? Yeah, Emily, please.
Yeah, thanks. Jim, thank you. This was a really interesting presentation. And you may have just answered my question in your answer to the previous question. But I was wondering, part of what you said was about these increased fire vegetation feedbacks potentially accelerating that shift in biome. And so I was wondering, do we have any predictions on what those types of changes in land cover or land use might be, or what those shifts in biomes might be at a kind of a geospatial scale? Like I said, you may have just answered it by saying we're not sure if it's actually going to be permanent change or more of a transition. So
no, that's a really good question, and I think it's a really active area of research. I would say that the denser the forests are, the more they tend to carry fires, and I think also kind of near tree line that shrub systems tend to carry fires more easily than lower elevation, more poorly drained peat and like tussock areas. So there are these potentials of feedbacks, but I don't know if we know the strength yet of like how fire might accelerate those types of transitions to shrubs. But I think there are a couple that are potentially positive that, yeah, again, if the fire kind of prepares the soil in a way that allows for greater germination of black spruce near tree line, that's going to increase the fire risk moving forward, like over the remainder of the 21st century.
thanks.
Any other questions? Yeah, Micah?
Open my video so you can see me. Hi, Jim. Thank you so much for that talk. It was really interesting and is totally outside of my area of expertise. I'm an epidemiologist, so I come from like the public health world. But actually something you were talking about at the very end that I would love to get sort of the big picture lay of the land for like a non-expert. You're talking about Arctic wildfires and carbon storage, and sort of where it seems like maybe there was a thought of what that looks like, and then maybe some of that's changing a little bit in terms of, it seems like maybe you think that there might be more potential release potentially from wildfires. I don't know. What is the state? If you were to give me a 30-second state of the science on that, I would love it.
Sure. No, I think there's it's pretty widely accepted in the carbon cycle and ecosystem community that through many different types of modeling approaches, that climate warming is likely to accelerate fires and lead to carbon drawdown. And there are multiple mechanisms for that. One is that one is the lightning that I described. Another one is just that you're going to have potentially a hotter and drier summer and potentially a longer fire season, so that those fires can burn longer. And there's a very strong, of course, correlation between a hotter and drier summer and like a regional fire activity. And I would say one thing so I think it's an important threat for human health, especially there are many places where fires traditionally have been managed in kind of a let burn condition, where there's like a very limited response in both Canada and Alaska. And there's now a community of scientists are starting to think about trying to actively manage fires there, not to suppress everything, but to try to keep the fire regime stable. So don't take fires all the way out, but statistically, could you keep fires flat instead of them increasing from climate warming, and then get carbon credits and potentially other ecosystem service benefits like improved human health from reduced organic and black carbon loading by potentially intervening while the fires are small. So that's really exciting to a number of us. And there's some projects that are in the design phase now in Alaska for that. But it's pretty widely accepted that climate change is a strong threat for increasing fires and reducing carbon stocks.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I guess and then maybe one step forward in terms of fire potential, the fire's potential influence on carbon release. I'm kind of curious about that. What's sort of the state on that in terms of specifically Arctic fires and thinking about permafrost thaw, and not, I guess, just carbon, but also methane.
Right. I mean, the biggest issue I think is that the fires are just going to get bigger and cover more area, but there is additional evidence that they may also get a little more severe and they may burn deeper. And then that triggers this secondary, potentially like a thermokarst, or it could potentially start accelerating a deeper conversion of an active layer into you could drain some thermokarst lakes. And so there's some concern there, the secondary effects. And so that will potentially accelerate the deeper emission of carbon from carbon's been locked up in permafrost for millennia. Yeah, but the direct effects are really, I think, critical on the decadal to end of 2100 timescale. And yeah.
Okay, thank you. Ken, do you have a quick question? We do have a 20-minute discussion phase. Do you want to ask now or later?
I won't be able to join the discussion. I was just going to respond to some of what Micah had for questions. And it was, so the Fish and Wildlife Service Yukon Flats National Wildlife Refuge is already implementing a program to try to reduce fire on the Yetama, which is the permafrost that has a really ice-rich, carbon-rich that's left over from the Pleistocene in the Yukon Flats. There's also the projects that under the Arctic Council that the Gwich'in GCI has started the Arctic Fire program that we're trying to wrap up on the CAF, and it relates to both human health and fire ecology, et cetera. So there's a number of things going on out there. And if you've got some more questions, Mike, I'd be happy to answer them offline. And they are really interesting, Jim, and also love to talk to you at some point too about this. So that's it.
Great. All right. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Jim. Yeah. For the interest of time, let's move to the next two presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Hailong. I'm going to introduce our next presenter, who is Jason Sachs from EPA's Office of Research and Development. And Jason's presentation will start bridging us from physical system interactions into that human health impact. And his presentation will focus on research on air quality impacts of wildland fire smoke, health and ecological impacts, and also efforts to inform risk communication and public health protection. Just a quick background on Jason. He is a senior scientist on wildland fire in the Office of Research and Development Center for Public Health and Environmental Assessment. And his expertise is in the health effects of wildland fire smoke, as well as the relationship between prescribed fire and wildfire. And Jason's a great person to have present to IARPC because he himself is a member of and leads multiple interagency efforts to examine and communicate the health risks of wildland fire smoke. So Jason, thanks so much for joining us. And I see you've already shared your screen, which is great. So I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks for that introduction, Emily. And I'm happy to be here to talk about some of the work that ORD's been involved in around wildland fire smoke research. So before I jump in, I just need to display this disclaimer. Okay, so the work of ORD around wildland fire, and I note wildland fire here because we have work on wildfire and prescribed fire, which we collectively refer to as wildland fire. It can really be grouped into four broad categories of work. And most of this revolves around smoke. And it's housed in our Air, Climate, and Energy, or ACE National Research Program. And so as I work through the presentation, I'm going to provide some examples of the types of work that we have in each of these buckets. And so with respect to emissions from wildland fires, we've conducted numerous studies to try and understand emissions from wildland fire through controlled burn experiments under different combustion conditions. And these efforts are aimed at providing information to support a variety of activities, including more accurate exposure assessment and epidemiologic studies, improving our understanding of ambient PM 2.5 that's attributed to wildland fire, and also better understanding how to limit emissions from prescribed fires when they're occurring. We have additional work on emissions through our EPA's Air Quality Time Series Equates project. And this is a project where we're incorporating not only multi-year fire activity, but also emissions inventory data. And it's through the Equates project that we're also able to inform the development of air quality management strategies around wildland fire. So one of the big challenges that we experience with wildland fire is the spatial misalignment that we see between burned area, where populations reside, and where air quality where air quality monitors exist. And with respect to air quality monitors, as I'm sure many of you are aware, this is because the monitoring network that we have across the United States was not designed with wildland fire smoke in mind. And this lack of spatial coverage has really complicated our ability to communicate air quality conditions during smoke events. And so in collaboration with the U.S. Forest Service, EPA, both the Office of Air and Radiation, as well as the Office of Research and Development, developed the fire and smoke map. And one of the big contributions of ORD in this project was the development of a correction factor, which allowed for the inclusion of purple air sensor data into the map, which included both permanent regulatory monitors, which is traditionally how the air quality index is communicated, along with some of the temporary smoke monitors that are deployed during smoke events, as well as the purple air sensors. And it's this combination of air quality information that's improved the spatial coverage of data that we have, and has improved our ability to communicate air quality conditions, and specifically the air quality index during smoke events. There's currently ongoing efforts to try and expand the fire and smoke map to include additional sensor data. I know there's some different pilot projects that are happening right now to try and do this. Version 4.0 of the fire and smoke map was just released a few weeks ago, and it has added features and improved functionality in both the web-based version as well as the mobile app. So additionally, with respect to trying to characterize wildland fire air quality smoke impacts, we're partnering with EPA regions as well as the Office of Air and Radiation to expand air quality monitoring during smoke events through our Wildfire Smoke Air Monitoring Response Technology, or WSMART program. And so this was a program that was originally initiated in 2021 to support not only the White House, but also EPA administrator goals. And since then, it has been part of ORD's ACE research program. So this is an air monitor loan program to provide supplemental monitoring needs to state and local governments, as well as tribal governments. We are also supporting the U.S. Forest Service's air resource advisors, which are through the Interagency Wildfire Air Quality Response Program. And this is providing additional supplemental monitoring data for the ARAs during wildfire smoke events so they can better communicate air quality conditions to the public. And so in the next few slides, I'm going to provide a little bit more detail about this WSMART program. And so the program consists of not only loaning stationary monitors, but also some mobile monitors. And so the mobile monitoring platform is the vehicle add-on mobile monitoring system, or which we refer to as VAMS. It's monitoring not only PM 2.5 and but also carbon monoxide. And we started including carbon monoxide measurements in the WSMART program because the Forest Service was providing instances where they were seeing really high CO concentrations around base camps. We also have a stationary multi-pollutant sensor, which also includes PM 2.5 and CO, as well as VOCs. And originally within the program, we were also loaning purple air sensors to measure PM 2.5 concentrations, but this is phasing out of the program, and we're going to be focusing solely on the multi-pollutant monitors, as well as the mobile monitors, or the VAMs. So to provide a couple of case examples of us disseminating the WSMART technology to other areas, one is we provided purple air sensors to the Tetlin Tribal Council. The closest air quality monitor was over 200 miles away from from their location. And so they didn't have good information with respect to PM 2.5 concentrations that they were experiencing during a smoke event. So we provided them with a few purple air sensors, and they were able to monitor the air quality conditions during the smoke event. And they've also had the option to retain these purple air sensors. And this information is being uploaded into the fire and smoke map. Earlier, I talked about how the VAM system has traditionally been an add-on to vehicles. Well, this is an instance in the Elkhorn fire in Idaho where it was attached to a raft, and it was sent down a river to provide air quality information to inform a rafting community. And so it's just providing an example of the ability to adapt the different monitoring technologies that we have through the W-SMART program to provide air quality conditions during a multitude of examples. So in addition to monitoring campaigns, ORD has conducted research to assess air quality impacts during smoke events using available air quality monitoring data. And this is one example of a recent study by Rice et al., where we were asking the question of, are there additional pollutants outside of PM 2.5 that we should start to be concerned with during wildfire smoke events? We know that we're seeing an increase in smoke due to acreage burn, which you saw in the previous presentation. And so from a public health perspective, while rightfully so, the majority of the focus has been on trying to reduce PM 2.5 concentrations, as we're seeing more smoke, it's important to ask the question, well, are there other pollutants that we should be concerned about, and that it could change the public health strategies that we've been implementing because of the focus on PM 2.5. And so this study, we were focusing on HAPS concentrations and whether there was evidence of increasing HAPS due to the increase in wildfire smoke that we've seen. The study did show that there were increases in HAPS, but none of the increases were exceeding acute or chronic reference values. But it's something for us to keep in mind as we are starting to see this increase in smoke over the last couple decades. So in addition to air quality characterization that I've talked about already, we do continue to publish peer-reviewed studies examining the relationship between smoke and health effects, as well as ecosystem impacts. With respect to animal toxicological studies, these studies are examining different exposure durations, as well as different combustion conditions and fuel sources. And then we have epidemiologic studies that are further examining the relationship between smoke exposure and health, specifically focusing on at-risk populations, assessing different exposure durations. I mean, most of the evidence that we have to date has really been rooted in what we have for ambient PM 2.5, so focusing often on 24-hour average or daily exposures, where we have a lot of questions still about health effects potentially due to subdaily exposures, even longer duration exposures within and across years, as we're seeing that the smoke patterns are changing over time, as well as studies that are examining different exposure assessment methods. With respect to studies examining ecosystem impacts, we have research that has evaluated ecological impacts of fire and smoke on water quality, sensitive plants and animals, as well as ecosystems as a whole. So similar to other aspects of wildland fire smoke research, specifically focusing on health, a lot of our understanding is rooted in the decades of work on ambient PM 2.5. And it's through these studies that we know that there are various populations and life stages that are at increased risk of health effects. And so within this project, ORD leveraged that information, but then also asked the question as whether there are specific characteristics of certain populations that may increase their risk due to wildfire smoke exposure. And could we identify those populations and where they reside? And so that led to the development of the Community Health Vulnerability Index, which was originally published by Rappold et al. In 2017. And recently it was updated by external researchers to include some additional variables. So some related to adaptive capacity, which is the ability to mitigate smoke impacts and trying to capture that within a population, as well as sensitivity. So where you can see here that there's a lot of factors that were included in the development of this Community Health Vulnerability Index. In the original version, we didn't assess the percentage of the population that comprised each of those factors. And so they included variables around sensitivity, which was trying to capture that of the population that encompasses each of these factors of vulnerability. And so they also added additional smoke years, as well as examined different indices of smoke exposure. And so this project really falls under the umbrella of what information can we obtain and develop that helps us inform areas where we may need to focus public health efforts to protect communities from smoke exposure. So ORD is also involved in work around better understanding the air quality and health impacts of smoke from fires that burn through the wildland-urban interface. It was noted in the 2022 report from NASEM on the chemistry of urban fires that there was a deficiency of data around WUI fires. And so EPA's work has really tried to not only develop new science and further identify what the composition of WUI fire smoke is and potential health implications, but also try to leverage existing data to try and answer some of these same questions. And so here's a few examples of that type of work. The top is a study from Holder et al., where she was able to leverage existing data from California on fires that had burned through the wildland-urban interface, as well as monitoring data to develop emissions factors for WUI fires. You had a study by Boaju et al., where they relied on available air quality monitoring data to assess air quality characteristics around the campfire in California, and they saw that there was a marked increase in lead concentrations during the campfire. And then we also have experimental studies that are relying on fuel sources that may mimic what we see in a WUI fire. And so this study by Kim et al. Was using smoke from a burn pit, which encompasses a lot of the same materials that we see burned during a WUI fire, to assess toxicological responses due to exposures from burn pits, which could be transferable to what we see in a WUI fire. And so this collective information is, again, kind of going down that public health road of what are we seeing that's emitted during WUI fires? How may this be different from what we see during purely biomass fires? And does this change what we need to do from a public health action perspective? So moving towards risk communication and interventions to reduce smoke exposures, one of the studies that's been a real focus of ours in trying to further inform all aspects of risk communication interventions is the Wildfire Aspire study. And this is part of an EPA initiative that emphasizes working directly with stakeholders to develop solutions to both public health concerns as well as environmental concerns. And the research has involved local partners from the beginning to identify what information they need to effectively communicate actions that building owners and the public can take to reduce public health risks during smoke episodes. And it was through these engagements that it was identified that community members really didn't understand the potential health impacts of smoke exposure, nor what actions they could take to protect themselves. In addition, it was unclear to the community of the importance of cleaner indoor air and what they could do from a building perspective to try and ensure cleaner indoor air during smoke episodes. And so the study was really trying to address two fundamental questions. The first was, what science is available to support recommendations to communities to develop cleaner air spaces in larger buildings, such as schools and community centers? And the second is, what interventions are effective for reducing indoor smoke exposures and related risks? And so this was accomplished through a variety of efforts of a combination of field studies, laboratory experiments, as well as a prize-based challenge. And you can see that some of the locations of the field studies were in Missoula, Montana, and Hoopa Valley, California, as well as the Hoopa Valley and Tulare County for the indoor air analysis and health components. And so I'm going to touch on a couple of the aspects of this project on this next slide. And so one of the outcomes of the project was a prize-based challenge to develop a cleaner indoor air technology that could reduce smoke exposures inside. And the phase 2 winners were announced earlier this year. The one on the left is, it's called the Cocoon. And this is a novel do-it-yourself air cleaner that uses an affordable standard housing fabric. to create a large tube-shaped filter attached to the front of a box fan, and it's akin to a windsock. And then the second is a technology developed by Metalmark, and it's a clean air device, and this uses a novel nanomaterial coating on a filter that enables self-cleaning of the filter, so it doesn't have to be continuously replaced. Based on some of the work that was done to assess effectiveness of different air cleaners, there was a large effort around assessing the effectiveness of do-it-yourself air cleaners. And stemming from that, we developed an infographic of best practices if you are going to develop your own do-it-yourself air cleaner. And we've also been working to develop a best practices around indoor air quality from what we learned from the case study or the pilot projects within this effort from Missoula and the Hoopa Valley field studies. And so a lot of the work that all of this is feeding into is how do we best communicate to the public the risks of smoke exposure and what they can do to protect themselves. And the way that we've accomplished this is through a variety of different avenues. We have public health outreach. Obviously, the biggest one is the fire and smoke map of communicating air quality conditions and making recommendations of when people should take exposure reduction actions. We have interagency effort of developing wildfire smoke, a guide for public health officials, which is not only providing basic information to public health officials around the risk of wildfire smoke, but also information they would want to communicate to the public. We also have preparedness resources, as I mentioned already, the do-it-yourself air cleaners and how and the most effective way to make them and tutorials. And then we also have efforts to try and reach the healthcare community. We know for a fact that medical professionals have not really been educated on the risks of poor air quality and wildfire smoke, and we've developed continuing medical education courses, which the wildfire smoke and your patient's health one, we're in the process of updating and trying to get reaccredited so that we can reach that community and have better engagement around people when they're visiting their healthcare providers, so they know what actions to take during smoke episodes. And so with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Jason. So we have a couple minutes for questions here, and I'll look in the chat as well as for raised hands. And I can ask one while we're waiting for folks to form their thoughts. Jason, you mentioned the fire and smoke maps and fire and smoke map and how that collects this real-time information. Are those data also being used to help us understand what drives or influences smoke patterns and therefore exposure?
So you mean trying to assess like how effective predictions of smoke would be, and then using like kind of going backwards?
Yeah, like are those real-time data informative at all for helping us then predict patterns in the future, what drives patterns of smoke movement and therefore exposure to different populations?
Yeah, I haven't heard of it being used in that way. I mean, I know a lot of the air quality monitoring data is ultimately used to to try and assess how effective are the models. But I haven't heard of the fire and smoke map data being specifically used in that way.
Great, thanks.
Sure.
Any other questions at the moment for Jason?
And always feel free to shoot me an email if you have any other questions that come up afterwards.
Well, I had one more question and then we can turn it over to our next speaker. And I know we'll have time at the end for discussion as well. For the DIY air cleaners and the work on that and sort of the development of the infographic and whatnot, what's been done to disseminate that information? Because I feel like that's the sort of information that would be so useful at the community level to folks that are, like you said, maybe have no idea about the indoor air issues and are facing wildfire smoke events.
Yeah, so there is an EPA website that has that information. But I'll be the first to recognize that sometimes the EPA websites are hard for people to find information, and so we're trying to be better about communicating information. I know I'm almost positive that when people have gone to wildfire meetings, they've taken printout like little note card printouts of the infographic that they've shared. we had a publication that came out that characterized what was found in the DIY air cleaner study. We've tried different avenues, but I always feel like there's more that we can do to try and disseminate information more broadly.
That's great. And I think that's something that IARPIC might be interested in exploring as a venue for some of that. So we can definitely talk about that more.
Okay.
And someone just asked, can you share the
Yeah.
link to the DIY instructions on the EPA
I'll put
website?
I'll put it in the chat.
Great, thanks. So with that, think I'm turning over to Sarah to introduce our next speaker.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. So now we're going to continue the journey from atmospheric monitoring to, some of the public health intersection to some more of the human health implications. I'm excited to introduce two people who are working directly with Alaska communities to better understand their needs. We have Dr. Micah Hahn, who's an associate professor of environmental health at the University of Alaska Anchorage in the Institute for Circumpolar Health Studies. And then Dr. Nancy Fresco, who is the network coordinator for SNAP, which in this case, SNAP is the Scenarios Network for Alaska and Arctic Planning. And she's with the International Arctic Research Center at University of Alaska Fairbanks. I've had the pleasure to work with both of them on a variety of different work groups around this topic. And so I'm really excited to hear more of all the really cool things that they're doing and share that with the rest of this group. Thanks, Micah and Nancy.
Thanks, Sarah. How does that look? Are you guys just seeing my full screen now and not necessarily our presenter notes?
We're seeing nothing.
Sorry, yeah, is that a thumbs up? I can't see anyone now.
No, I'm not seeing anything. I think it stopped sharing for some reason.
Let me
Maybe,
check again.
yeah, trying again. And sometimes there's an option in the top left to like swap displays that would move it from the presenter mode to
How
the
does
full.
that look?
That looks good. Yep.
Good. Okay, I'll move the Zoom thing out of the way. All right, awesome. Well, thank you guys for the introduction. That was a perfect segue, Jason. Thank you. I'm so glad you went in front of us because you gave a great intro to some of the things that I was going to talk about, so I can gloss over those. But as Sarah mentioned, I am co-presenting with Nancy Fresco, one of my co-PIs, and Sarah is actually part of our project team, so you'll get to see her face here in a second. But our project really centers around not creating new data, but trying to pull together all of the great data that are out there in a way that it's really accessible for communities and community level decision making, specifically around wildfires, smoke, and health in Alaska. There we go. And I want to talk about our project team up front because this is a really component of our project. And so we have sort of the research team from University of Alaska in Anchorage and Fairbanks. Nancy is from Fairbanks. And we also have collaborators from the University of Washington. But we also have that way outnumber us as a huge group of community and state partners. And they've really been a key component of this project. And I'll explain how in just a second. So environmental justice is really I would say the foundation of this project, both in terms of what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it. So the goal of this project is really to improve data access and equity around information related to wildfires, smoke, and health to support local decision-making in Alaska. And when I say how we do it, we've really tried to create a space for our project team, so our community and state partners who are coming in from outside of academic institutions to feel like they are a major part of this project team and are really having a voice in the development of these tools and what these tools are gonna look like as a resource for our state. We've already talked a little bit. The first presenter did a great job giving an overview of wildfires in the Arctic and Alaska and how these are having major regional and global impacts. But actually, I really want to focus on the local impacts because this is, again, the focus of our project is developing tools to support local community level decision-making related to human health. So when we talk about human health in Alaska, it may look a little bit different from what we traditionally think of as health from sort of a Western biomedical perspective. And this is something we've talked about with our project team quite a bit. When we talk about health, and particularly in our Alaska Native communities, things like being able to harvest subsistence resources, so our traditional foods like berries or salmon come up. Being able for kids to be able to recreate and play outside during summertime is a major time of getting outside in Alaska, because we've just had to come off of a long winter. People talk about being able to pass down traditions. So you see in this bottom picture, a bunch of students and actually older people are learning how to cut and smoke salmon. And all of these things are considered really important aspects of being a healthy person living in Alaska, and they might be inhibited by wildfires or wildfire smoke. And I bring this up because when we're creating tools for Alaska around wildfire and wildfire smoke, they need to be really flexible and be able to be utilized for making a wide variety of health decisions that may not always come to mind when we're thinking about health from sort of that biomedical point of view. And also might be different from the types of decisions that many communities in the lower 48 are making with some of the tools that are available at the national level. So for example, in a recent conversation we had about how our partners want to use these tools, they talked about things like wanting to be able to understand and predict caribou migration to identify by identifying areas that are the driest, or during a wildfire using smoke information to decide where they might migrate to for hunting during the hunting period. They might want to look at current snow cover to better understand where to harvest salmon berries, for example. They may also want to look at long-term flammability forecasts to be able to predict consequences for moose migration after wildfires. And they said this would be actually really helpful to be able to have long-term conversations in their communities about the long-term consequences of wildfires on important food resources, because it can have implications for where people are going to be accessing food and the potential loss of traditional intergenerational knowledge training if these resources are no longer available. So it's just a very different sort of lens and set of decisions that people are trying to make on the ground here in Alaska. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the sort of the landscape of what wildfire smoke and health data look like in Alaska. So Jason already talked about this a little bit, which was a great introduction, but basically this map is just showing where the EPA regulatory monitors are located in Alaska in our major population centers. Those are those green dots, relative to the vast number of communities, rural communities that we have across the state. In the landscape now of air quality monitors looks a little bit different. This is a recent screenshot from the fire and smoke map that Jason talked about. And you can see that the number of monitors in Alaska has actually probably increased, I would say 8 or 9-fold in the last handful of years, since 2019 or so, with purple air monitors. Our Department of Environmental Conservation is putting out a few more monitors. But still, you can see that a lot of the state and a lot of our communities don't host a real-time air quality monitor. And so they need to be able to access smoke information through a different route to be able to make decisions during wildfires. And in terms of health and demographic information, which is sort of the other part of our project, in the last few years, there's been a huge increase in the number of tools that are available to access this type of environmental justice information at a small spatial scale in the United States. What often happens is when you look at a tool that was created sort of for a national audience, we're getting smaller and smaller in the geography. Things like counties or census tracts are often used for communities in the lower 48, which makes a ton of sense. But then when you use that same geography in Alaska, it becomes this is a map of census tracts in Alaska. And you can see that outside of our urban areas, census tracts are actually quite big. And really, when you display information at that level, it is just not quite as useful for community level decision making. And so there's a need to be able to display this type of information at just a slightly different geography for Alaskan communities. So as wildfires are continuing, and we are seeing that we're going to have more intense wildfire seasons in the future, communities need strategies to be able to assess compounding climate hazards and social vulnerabilities, being able to see sort of both sides of the hat, the wildfire and smoke information, as well as the health and demographic information. They need to be able to prioritize climate-related health impacts and vulnerable demographic groups. in order to design effective interventions and apply for climate resilience funding. There's been a lot of conversation in our project team about the fact that there's so much money out there right now. Like, this is a great time to be able to apply for climate adaptation funding, but there's sort of this big gap between the funding that's available and the ability and capacity of communities that are just overstretched to be able to apply for that funding. So one of the goals of pulling all of these data sets together in an easily accessible way is so that people on the ground in Alaska can grab that information to be able to put together the narrative that they need to apply for this kind of funding. They don't need to be spending time trying to hunt down census information to be able to tell a story about their community. They need to be able to get it down on paper and get that funding to be able to implement interventions that can actually support public health where they live and work. Okay, I put up this slide just to say that our project has several different components. Today, Nancy and I are really just talking about this first component, which is designing wildfire and health tools. I'm just going to give you a super quick overview, and then I'm going to hand it over to Nancy to actually show you what the tools look like in their current version. We're right in the middle of our project. So one of the tools that we've been working on is the Alaska Wildfire Explorer. And in talking with our project team, it's become clear that people want information not just for real-time data, which is super important, but they're actually also really interested in getting past and future projections of smoke. And so these are some of the data sources that we're pulling together. I think I saw that Jingchu actually just popped on this call, and he's been really helpful in getting some of the past and present data together for this tool. And then on the other side, another tool that we're working on is Northern Climate Reports. And this is where communities will be able to access all of the demographic and social information. And these are some of the data sets that we're pulling in for those. And it's a really cool interface where you can search by community, but I don't want to steal Nancy's thunder. So I'm gonna hand it over to her now, and she can give you a little bit of a sneak peek of the, I don't know what the terminology is, beta version. The early versions of these two tools. And Nancy, I can keep flipping for you if you want to tell me when to.
That would be great. Then
Okay.
I don't have to shuffle, the slide management. So yeah, go ahead. And thank you. I'll be really mindful of time here. These have been some great presentations, and I do want to leave time at the end. And Micah has already given a great introduction. As I was introduced, I work at the Scenarios Network for Alaska and Arctic Planning. We're very much focused in on modeling, on figuring out how to take climate data and make it as usable and as applicable as possible for climate change adaptation really broadly. It's been amazing getting to work on this project with the team that Micah described, with lots of different knowledge bases coming into it, with the social science coming in. My own background is in biology, actually, so we're highly collaborative. It's also been wonderful getting to use so much of the data that is shared through Purple Air, like using lots and lots of work from EPA. So thank you and kudos to all that's happened there. So the screen that you're looking at right now is a screenshot from one of our online tools. It's a tool that pre-existed this project, but as Micah said, we're learning every day more about what information people want and which pieces of information to put together to create a fuller story. So this is a look at the air quality sensor network. Also available, I think in the next slide here, Micah, is that the ability to pull the information out from each air sensor and to so essentially to use what the folks at EPA and Purple Air have turned into an informational resource that's clear to people who are not scientists. Are you safe? What does this mean? And then notice that there's a link out to Purple Air so people can read more there. Next slide. And then the air quality forecast. So again, putting together what's happening now, what's likely to happen in 6 hours, in 12 hours, 24, 48 hours. This is great if a community is trying to plan, should we cancel an event? Should we, try to get people who are very sensitive, who have asthma, or young children to a safer place. This gives that short-term planning ability. So again, rolling different data sets into the same tool. Oh yeah, go ahead, Micah. I should whip through this. This searching by community name, this is something I should say I work with some really amazing computer gurus. That is not myself, but the SNAP team has some amazing programmers who have built in the capability in a lot of our tools to search, zoom in, immediately grab what community you're looking for, which is very much what people want. As Micah pointed out, really large landscape census tract level information, not necessarily what people are looking for. So this is, what's happening right where you are. And next slide. And this pulls out fires that are actually burning. Sadly, we did these screenshots when most of the fires were out, so everything is like green, good. But earlier in the summer, there were lots of these fires burning, some really big fires that were severely impacting air quality and health. So this allows people to see that. And then next, this is crediting as a really boring slide, but at the same time, it's really important. This is a ton of blue text, meaning there's a ton of links going on here to allow people to understand where this information came from, to understand that it's deeply collaborative, and to give them the ability to go look at all those sources and to look for more information there. So the next slide here. Now we're just totally shifting focus. So I said that the Wildfire Explorer tool pre-existed our collaboration with Micah and the rest of the team. This tool was one, this Northern Climate Reports tool was one we were building at the same time for primarily what we do, which is climate change information. So what's happening with hydrology, with rainfall, with permafrost, with temperature indicators, precipitation indicators, and allowing people, as you see in this is the main interface, choose your place, choose your community. Most people are going to do that by name, but you can also put in latitude, longitude, or you can search by different land areas. So it's a very flexible tool. You can click on the map, you can put in your community name, you can find where you are. And again, because Alaska, of course, is so vast and communities are small and often don't have very personalized information for rural and indigenous communities. This is trying to get things to people's fingertips so that it can be zoomed in and can be personal. So demographic and health data are a new piece of this tool, added to the other pieces that were already there. So moving on to the next slide here. This is and this is still in progress. We got feedback. We just had just last month had a really great meeting with the team. Heard from showed some of these same slides. Heard from people how they felt about having this included. But this is available information through census data. We've been searching data sets and trying to put this into the tool so that there can be this connection between what's happening with fire, what's happening with smoke, and then how might that affect health conditions, and how does that play in with other socioeconomic indicators in a community. So next, again, you would get to the main page. Say you put in Igiugig, and that's one of the communities that's been working with us really closely and helping us to develop this. You'll get a zoom map of Igiugig with a summary that actually is talking about climate change. You notice, extreme change is happening, and that extreme change, of course, is affecting fire and smoke and pretty much everything else for many, many communities around the state. Scrolling through this, you'll get the full picture, and it starts to feel like a story about climate change impacts. So next slide here. At the bottom of all that information about climate change is where we're putting, and again, this isn't quite there yet because we're making sure that it works for community members and we're doing this in collaboration with them, but potentially this demographic information. So here you're seeing bar charts and tables showing age by category, and then race and ethnicity, again in a graph and in a table. And then next, some of this health data. So percentage with a disability, percentage insured, percentage uninsured. And the comparisons there, you see in each case, these are the health conditions. We're comparing Igiugig, and notice that place names in our tools all have the name you'll find on a map, but also traditional names as well as we can. We ask communities, please let us know so that we can get these names correct. But comparing community names to Alaska as a whole and to the US as a whole, because again, so much is different in Alaska, and trying to get in here what is different, what those comparisons are. The idea being that having this information empowers the community to be able to do things like write a grant proposal saying, we need to be able to build a safe room with air quality filters because, you know, this is what's happening with air quality. This is who's in our community. These are the health conditions. Having that all in one place as community information is the idea. So next here, other demographics. And so again, this is still in flux because what is important and what isn't important, it's tricky. Again, you know, when we're digging through available data, there's some categories that really don't make sense for Alaska. Things like, you know, what percentage of people own a car? Well, of course you don't own a car if you're in a community that's not connected to the road system. And so trying to put a lot of information in a tool, but have it be the right information, having it be what the community has selected and what they want. One thing to notice here, yellow button that says download demographics data as CSV. Snap does this in all their tools. Obviously, you know, CSV, comma, separated values file that you can open in Google Sheets or Excel, trying to hand over the data in a form that's convenient and usable and accessible. Turn it into your own spreadsheet. Do what you, the community, you, the people want with it. So next, really quickly here, I just, having said this is in the context of the climate change information that we have accessible in the same tool. The idea is that just presenting demographic data and just presenting fire data doesn't tell necessarily the complete story unless you wrap it up in a package. So within the Northern Climate Reports tool, there's some information on long-term projections of flammability among the other climate change data. And so you can see what some other speakers in the same have, you know, going back to our first speaker, you know, increases in flammability and then maybe some stabilization as flammable fuels are burned. So this is the very long view picture. Between the two tools, the Wildfire Explorer and Northern Climate Reports, there's this sense of what's happening now, what's happening in the very near future, what might happen over coming years, coming decades. All of that, it feels necessary to community members in terms of, you know, planning the now, planning the near future, but also contextualizing and planning and adapting to long-term change in fire and smoke. Next, I think we have just a couple of other slides here. Again, putting it in context, our fire modeling also links to vegetation modeling. Someone asked a question about that. So as fire regimes change, so too does vegetation change. I should say the fire modeling comes from multiple sources, but this is from the Fresco, the Alaska Frame-Based Ecosystem Code fire model that's been around for years and updated many times during that time. Temperature indicators I threw in as well. This is just more climate change information. Again, contextualizing the change, because if you've got smoke rolling in, but you've also got, for example, way more very hot summer days, then you're talking about people locking themselves in their houses with their air filters on, but it's also really hot, and that can cause other stressors. So multiple stressors can be a huge issue as well. And this, again, tries to give people the information to put that into context. And I think that might be, let's see, is there another slide? Oh, there we go. That's the other slide. Information. Please do ask us questions. If you ask Micah a question, she can always pass it along to me. This, you know, this project is still a work in process, and we've been extraordinarily grateful to our project partners, particularly community members, for working on this with us. So I will stop, and I'm sorry that was longer than I intended.
Great. Thank you so much to both of you. Do we have any questions? Don't see any in the chat yet.
Yeah, maybe I will ask a quick question. Yeah, thank you, Micah and Nancy, for the very impressive presentation. Nice work. So I wonder for the modeling, the air quality modeling, what is the major challenge for the local Alaska air quality like forecast? Given that some of the fires impact is from other lower latitude or upwind side, are those the major challenge for the model to get accurate forecast?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll ping Jingchu. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I see that you're on here. So Jingchu is an atmospheric modeler who is at UAF. And so I've been working with him on another project and developing some of the historical data for Alaska, but also he's been helping pull the forecasts. So I'll hand it over to you and you can maybe address that question if you don't mind.
Sure. That's a great question. I think there are a number of challenges for doing air quality forecast during wildfire season. One is that we have lots of clouds in summer. Once you have clouds, as you know, satellite cannot see through clouds. And most models are driven by satellite-derived FRP or fire detection products. If you have clouds, then there's not much you can do there. That's one problem. Another problem is that there are lots of small fires satellites cannot pick up. We're looking at like small fires about less than 100 acres fires. Even we sometimes cannot pick them up. So those still can cause problems here and there. And another challenge is that we also have very heavy smoke there too. It's more about AOD. When we have heavy smoke, sometimes satellite product will consider heavy smoke as clouds. This is more algorithm problem that we will have to, we are working with NOAA right now trying to see somehow we can change the criteria about cloud versus heavy smoke. And of course, there's injection height problem. That's, okay, I can give you a long list of things that we found that for Fairbanks or because this is considered interior Alaska. Interior Alaska is often when we have wildfire smoke, it's not that windy. Therefore, there are a lot of smoke actually in the surface layer, making a very strong immersion layer. We found that even lots of meteorology models cannot necessarily get this immersion layer correct. If that's the case, that will cause a very different see the mixed layer for smoke. Therefore, you have different vertical distribution. That's another uncertainty we're looking into right now. So, of course, the resolution is not a problem. Fortunately enough, we're now looking at her smoke, even the next generation, because the model Micah and the Nancy show that's from GL's FP. That's like 30 kilometer by 30 kilometer. Compared to her smoke or next generation is 3 by 3 kilometer. That give you much finer resolution. That also could introduce some uncertainty as well. So I guess in summary, we found that models are not doing a very good job in Alaska. Maybe Jim has some ideas. We are also looking at GFAT and compared to other emission inventories, we found GFAT actually doing better, but GFAT has a delay, about 6 to 12 months delay. So it's not in real time. If we need to use real time data, we will need to use other emission inventories from satellites. So that also lead to some uncertainty as well. I don't know if there are a lot more things we are thinking.
Thank you very much. I definitely will follow up with you on those details. Thank you.
Yep, sure.
I think we are over time, but thank you all for staying. I don't know, Meredith,
Yep, yeah, I'm able to leave the meeting open for a couple more minutes, but I know people have to drop off. So when we get to the end of the questions, we can stop the meeting. Looks like there's one more in the chat. So we can address that if other people have questions. raise your hand, put it in the chat, speak now or forever hold your peace. We will try to be really mindful of people's time though, and respectful of it and as quickly as possible. So there's that one kind of follow-up question there in the chat.
Jingcho, looks like it's for you.
Yeah, I see Didier has a good question. We actually don't know for sure because we don't have we have not done much evaluation for tendril fires at this point. Probably Jim has some insights because we all love GFED.
No, I think that's really difficult. I mean, FRP is really powerful, and I know that there's discussion now to build new constellation of satellites that can measure fires around the clock, and that will be very exciting to help us with air quality forecasting and tracking these fires more, getting between the clouds that you're describing, Jingko. Yeah.
Thanks for the answers and thanks to the presenters.
Thanks everyone. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Nice to meet everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you all. Yeah,
Thanks for the
thank you all
invitation.
the speakers. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.